Picture this. London, 1720. In a cramped room off Cornhill, a man opens a notebook. On the door, a handwritten sign. A company for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. People laugh. Then they line up. Within 6 hours, he's collected thousands of pounds in cash deposits. No business plan, no details. Just a promise of profit. At sunset, he closes the book, pockets the money, and disappears forever. Now zoom out. Around the corner, in a smoky coffee house called Jonathan's, a different frenzy is unfolding. Men shout prices, pass crumpled notes, slam fists on oak tables slick with spilled coffee. At the center of this chaos is a single name, the South Sea Company. Its stock chart looks like a cliff face. In January, one share cost $128. By June, $890. By August, around $1,000. Then almost overnight, it falls back to where it started. And in the middle of that rise and fall stands one man, Isaac Newton, master of the mint, the mind who explained gravity, the orbits of planets, the motion of comets. He buys in early, sells with a huge profit. Then watching the price keep climbing, he snaps and throws almost his entire fortune back into the fire. Months later, the bubble bursts. Newton is ruined. He will spend the rest of his life refusing to let anyone say South Sea in his presence. I can calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies, he says, but not the madness of people. So what was this madness really? On the surface, the South Sea bubble looks like any other old market mania. A crowd bewitched by a story of exotic trade and easy money. But the real story sits somewhere far colder. The South Sea Company wasn't mainly about ships and silver. It was a debt deal dressed up as a dream, a financial machine built to swallow Britain's war debt and turn it into private wealth. The South Sea trade was the brochure. The product was financial engineering. Directors and ministers discovered they could turn a rising share price into a weapon. Use it to cancel government IOUs cheaply, create stock out of thin air, then sell that stock to the public and pay themselves. Ordinary people, servants, shopkeepers, widows, weren't only speculating. They were unknowingly financing a vast transfer from taxpayers to insiders. And the only real trade the company ever did was in human beings. Its main legal business was the Asiento de Negros, a monopoly on shipping enslaved Africans to Spanish America. Even that they mismanaged and often lost money on. But the idea of that trade, gold, sugar, slaves, and silver pouring into London, was enough to set the city on fire. Strip away the wigs and quills, and the pattern feels familiar. A government drowning in debt, a clever structure to turn that debt into speculative assets. A story about a new frontier that justifies insane prices. Borrowed money chasing its own tail. Regulators paid in stock. And at the end, a brutal crash that wipes out the public while the best connected survive. It's the blueprint for the modern financial crisis. To see how Newton got caught, we have to open the black box of the scheme itself. Britain at the turn of the 18th century was broke. Years of war had left the government buried in IOUs, navy bills, tallies, annuities. Up to 50 million of debt, a huge sum for the time. To keep borrowing, it paid ruinous interest. The state needed a bailout, not from the Bank of England, but from somewhere more flexible. Enter John Blunt. Blunt ran the Hollow Sword Blade Company, once a sword maker, now a shadow bank. Aggressive, imaginative, and willing to push legal boundaries. His pitch to the government was simple. Create a new company, the South Sea Company. Give it a glamorous monopoly on trade with Spanish South America. Then let it take over big chunks of the national debt. Bondholders, people with steady government annuities, would be offered a swap. Hand in your IOUs. In return, get shares in this exciting new company, supposedly poised to tap the riches of the South Seas. On paper, it looked like a win for everyone. The government streamlines its debts. Bondholders get a shot at huge gains. The company collects interest from the Treasury and maybe profits from trade. But hidden in the fine print was the real trick. Parliament let the South Sea Company decide how many shares to give each creditor. There was no fixed, transparent exchange rate. That meant one crucial thing. The higher the market price of South Sea shares, the fewer shares the company had to issue to cancel each pound of debt. Imagine you hold $100 of government bonds. If the South Sea share price is $100, the company must give you one full share to square your $100. If the market price soars to $1,000, the company only needs to give you a tenth of a share. That tiny fragment is still worth $100. Behind the scenes, though, the company is authorized to create an entire $100's worth of stock for your conversion. So it gives you the tenth and quietly keeps the remaining 9/10 for itself. Those leftover shares are surplus stock, born out of thin air, and they are pure power. The company can sell this surplus into the frenzy, raising cash to pay a huge upfront fee to the government, throw dividends at early investors, and most importantly, quietly stuff the pockets of ministers with phantom stock. But how do you push the share price high enough for this to work? That's where Blunt's old friends at the Swordblade Bank return. Think of Swordblade as the Alameda research to South Sea's FTX. It's the hidden engine room. South Sea deposits its cash with Swordblade. Swordblade lends that cash out, often to the very same investors, so they can buy more South Sea shares. Borrow from the bank, buy stock, stock goes up, use the gains as collateral to borrow more, buy more stock. A self-feeding loop of leverage. By spring 1720, that loop is humming. The company launches a series of money subscriptions, new share offerings with an irresistible twist. Investors don't need to pay the full amount up front. Put down 20%, the rest in installments. For a few £100, you control thousands in stock. And if you don't even have the few hundred, no problem. The company, via Swordblade, will lend it to you, using the very stock you're buying as collateral. At the same time, directors whisper rumors into the market. New treaties with Spain, fresh ports in Peru, mountains of silver waiting to be tapped. In reality, Britain and Spain keep edging toward war. Voyages under the Asiento are slow, bloody, and tangled in red tape. The slave trade itself is barely profitable. But the image of that trade is enough. Change Alley explodes. Inside Jonathan's and Garraway's coffee houses, the air turns thick with tobacco smoke and sweat. Auctioneers sell shares by the candle. Bidding lasts only while a tallow candle burns, adding a literal flicker of time pressure. Dukes, merchants, and servants jostle shoulder to shoulder. A man can arrive in rags in the morning and leave by dusk with the promise of a carriage and a country estate. South Sea shares race from 128 in January to 330 in March, 550 in May, 890 in June. By August, they hover near $1,000. Copycat ventures sprout everywhere. Some promise insurance against theft. Others talk of importing trees, reclaiming land, or creating perpetual motion. Most have more imagination than substance. One, though, captures the spirit of the age perfectly. James Puckle's defense gun. Puckle patents a tripod-mounted flintlock with rotating cylinders. The sales pitch boasts that it fires round bullets at Christians and square bullets at Turks. The square shots, we're told, will inflict such hideous wounds that enemy Muslims will quickly see the beauty of Christian civilization. The gun barely works. It doesn't matter. In this mood, investors buy the story, not the metal. So many bubble companies suck in cash that Blunt starts to worry. All this side speculation is diluting the one thing he really needs: a relentless flow of money into South Sea stock. His solution is explosive. He persuades Parliament to pass the Bubble Act, banning new unchartered joint stock companies. Publicly, it's sold as a crackdown on fraud. Privately, it's meant to crush competitors and herd capital back into the South Sea. When enforcement begins in August, it backfires. Investors in smaller schemes are forced to dump their shares. To cover losses, they sell what they can still sell easily. South Sea stock. Exactly when the company needs constant fresh money to sustain its pyramid, the tap is turned off. The feedback loop snaps. And here, right at the crest of that insane curve, stands Isaac Newton. Newton isn't naive about money. As master of the mint, he's overseen a full recoinage of English currency. He understands metals, interest, and fraud better than most. Early in 1720, he buys South Sea stock when it's still relatively cheap. As prices climb into the 200s and 300s, he grows uneasy. The valuation doesn't add up. The profits aren't there. The South Sea trade is mostly rumor. So in April, he does the sensible thing. He sells. When the dust settles, Newton has locked in around $20,000 in profit, millions in today's money. For a while, he looks like the smartest investor in Britain. Then the price keeps climbing. $400, $500, $700. The alley buzzes with stories of footmen and maidservants getting rich. Men Newton considers fools now boast paper fortunes larger than his. He watches friends and colleagues plunge deeper into South Sea stock. At dinners and meetings, conversation circles back to one theme: how high it might go. That rational exit starts to feel like a mistake. At some point in June or July, Newton breaks. He goes back in, hard. He not only redeploys his original principal and profits, he adds more. In August, as the company launches its final subscription at $1,000 a share, Newton subscribes near the top. He is all in, just as the structure beneath begins to crack. News from France doesn't help. John Law's Mississippi system, another fusion of public debt and wild colonial promises, starts to unravel. Confidence shakes. Enforcement of the Bubble Act drains liquidity from London. Sword Blade, strained by endless loans and desperate purchases of South Sea shares, starts to wobble. In September, South Sea stock slides to $700, then $500, then $200. There are fewer buyers. Margin calls force leveraged investors to sell into a falling market. On September 24th, the Sword Blade Bank suspends payments. The secret heart of the machine has run out of cash. For Newton, there is no elegant exit. By the time he sells, he has not only lost his $20,000 profit, but another $20,000 of his own capital. Roughly half a lifetime's fortune, gone. He will die still comfortable, thanks to his salary and other holdings. But the humiliation scars him. He reportedly forbids anyone from mentioning the South Sea Company in his presence. Across London, similar stories play out. Bankrupt merchants vanish. Aristocrats flee abroad to dodge creditors. Suicides rise. Bodies are dragged from the Thames. Public rage forces Parliament to act. A committee digs into the company's books and uncovers the inner workings. Surplus stock, loans against shares, and phantom stock accounts used to funnel profits to ministers. One senior minister is ruined and briefly jailed. Directors have estates confiscated to help compensate victims. A few low-level figures die before they can be questioned. But the whole system does not collapse. Robert Walpole, an ambitious politician, steps in. He brokers a rescue, persuading other big institutions to absorb chunks of South Sea stock and steady the market. At the same time, he quietly limits how far the inquiry reaches, protecting the monarchy and key allies. The scandal makes his career. He emerges as Britain's first real prime minister. The public, meanwhile, gets pennies on the pound. The South Sea chart, once a clean spike, flattens near $100. A year of fantasy disappears. What does this story leave us with 3 centuries later? First, a hard truth. Bubbles are not just accidents of optimism. They can be engineered. The South Sea bubble wasn't only a crowd losing its mind. It was a deliberately designed machine that turned rising prices into both profit and political leverage. Built on government debt, sold with a story of limitless new wealth, and sustained by leverage and corruption. Second, the trade that supposedly justified it, the Asiento slave contract, forces us to stare at the moral core. Human beings were the only real cargo this company ever reliably handled. Their suffering fed the rumors that pumped the stock. Speculation floated on blood. Third, Isaac Newton's loss reminds us that intelligence is not immunity. The smartest person in the room is still human, still vulnerable to envy and the fear of being left behind. Newton could look at a vertical stock chart, know it made no sense, sell, then watch his neighbors get richer and go back in at the top. If he could be pulled back into the fire, what does that say about us? Today, we like to believe our markets are safer. We have regulations, disclosures, models, and risk committees. Yet every time a shiny new structure appears promising great advantage, with details nobody to know, the old pattern glows underneath. Debt repackaged as opportunity, leverage disguised as innovation. A story of a new frontier, digital, financial, or geographic, powerful enough to silence doubt. The South Sea bubble isn't distant history, it's a mirror. And if we don't like what it reflects, we have to ask a hard question. In the next mania, will we be Newton before April or Newton after August?